Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going deep on a topic that I think is on everyone's mind these days.
Oh, yeah.
Rising prices.
Definitely.
But we're not just talking about any prices. We're going to zero in on two of the big ones.
Okay.
Education and healthcare.
Yeah, those are the ones that just seem to keep going up.
No matter what, right?
It's like they have a mind of their own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we've got this fascinating book excerpt that we're going to be diving into
Oh, cool.
from the book, Why Are the Prices So Damn High?
Catchy title.
Yeah. And it's got all this incredible data
Oh, wow.
spanning decades showing just how dramatic these increases have been.
I'm intrigued already.
Me too.
Oh,
But here's the thing that really caught my eye.
what's that?
The book argues that sometimes price increases can actually be a sign of progress.
Now, that's a twist I wasn't expecting.
Right?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So let's dive in.
Okay.
Because one thing that this book makes really clear is that this whole rising cost thing, it's not new.
Right, it's been going on for a while.
Yeah, it's been a steady climb for way longer than people have been freaking out about inflation.
Yeah, it's like a long-term trend.
It is. And the numbers are pretty wild when you look at them.
Oh, I bet.
For example, healthcare costs
Okay.
have increased almost ninefold since 1960.
Ninefold.
Ninefold.
That's insane.
It's mind-boggling.
Wow.
Think about, like back then, you could have had 9 doctor's visits for the price of one today.
That puts it into perspective.
It does, and it's not just healthcare, right?
No, I was going to say, what about education?
Education too, same deal.
Yeah.
The book points out that higher education costs have increased by a factor of 6 since 1950.
6 times.
6 times.
Wow. That's no wonder people are struggling with student loan debt.
It's a huge burden.
It is.
I bet a lot of our listeners out there have felt this firsthand, whether it's their own education or, their kids.
Yeah, definitely. And it's easy to jump to conclusions about what's causing these price hikes.
Oh, absolutely. Like we always hear about, administrative bloat in education or those medical malpractice lawsuits driving up healthcare costs.
Right. Those are the usual suspects.
Yeah, but the book actually uses data to debunk some of those myths.
Really?
Yeah. For example, it shows that administrative spending in higher ed has actually stayed pretty stable for decades.
So it's not the budget-busting monster we thought it was.
Not quite.
Interesting.
What about those medical malpractice lawsuits?
Okay, yeah, those going to be a major factor, right?
You'd think so. But the excerpt actually reveals that medical malpractice payments are just a tiny sliver of overall healthcare spending.
Oh, wow. How tiny are we talking?
In 2017, they came to just $4 billion annually.
Okay, $4 billion. That's still a lot of money, though.
It is, but it pales in comparison to the total healthcare spending of $3.3 trillion that same year.
Oh, wow. Okay, so those convenient scapegoats we love to blame just don't hold up.
They don't.
So if it's not administrative bloat or lawsuits,
Right.
what is driving these costs up?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
Well, the book introduces us to a concept called the Baumol effect.
The Baumol effect.
The Baumol effect.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
All right, well, break it down for us. What exactly is this Baumol effect, and how does it explain why we're paying so much more for education and healthcare?
I'm all ears.
Okay, so imagine this.
Okay.
You're going to a concert
All right.
to hear Beethoven's String Quartet performed live.
Sounds lovely.
Right.
Yeah.
Now think about it. The time and the musicians required to perform it today are the same as they were back in 1826.
Right? Same number of people, same instruments.
Same deal. No change in productivity there.
Makes sense.
Yet the cost of putting on that performance has gone up 23 times.
Wait, what, 23 times?
23 times.
But how can the cost go up that much if the productivity hasn't changed?
That's the Baumol effect in action.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, you have to consider what's happening in other parts of the economy.
Okay.
In sectors where productivity is increasing rapidly.
Like technology or manufacturing.
Exactly. Wages go up.
Right.
And those higher wages
Yeah.
create a ripple effect, impacting even sectors where productivity remains relatively stagnant.
Ah, I see. So those musicians in the string quartet, even though they aren't any more productive than their counterparts centuries ago, still need to be paid a wage that allows them to, live in today's world.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
So are you starting to see the connection here?
Yeah, I think so.
Because education and healthcare, they're kind of like that string quartet,
Okay,
stuck at a certain level of productivity,
right.
but still facing rising costs because of what's happening elsewhere in the economy.
So even though they're not becoming more efficient,
Right.
their costs go up because other more efficient sectors are pulling up wages.
Exactly. It's like this hidden force pushing prices higher.
That's a really interesting way to think about it.
And here's where things get even more interesting.
Oh, boy.
The book argues that this shift toward a more service-based economy might actually be a sign of progress.
Wait, really?
Yeah, think about it. We're getting wealthier as a society,
Okay. Yeah, that's true.
and that means we're demanding more services.
Like education and healthcare.
Exactly, the things that improve our lives.
That's a good point.
It's kind of like as your income grows, you might eat out more often, even if restaurant prices keep going up.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Similar concept.
Interesting.
But what about everything else we buy?
Right, good point.
Does this Baumol effect apply beyond just education and healthcare?
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure the price of my smartphone hasn't gone up 23 times since it was invented.
You're right to point that out.
Yeah.
And the book addresses this too.
Okay, good.
The data actually show that since 1950, the price of consumer goods has been cut in half.
Wow, really?
We're getting better and cheaper TVs,
Okay.
cars, you name it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, services like haircuts,
Right.
childcare,
Yeah.
and yes, education and healthcare have all seen their prices climb.
So there's a clear distinction there
There is.
between those labor-intensive services
Yeah.
and the manufactured goods.
And that difference is key to understanding the Baumol effect.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
So it's like we're getting cheaper stuff as a society, but the things that really enhance our lives,
Like education and healthcare.
those are becoming more expensive.
It's a trade-off.
It is. And the book highlights this fact that manufacturing productivity has grown 6 times faster than services.
6 times.
6 times.
Wow.
And that productivity gap
Yeah.
is a major driver of the price differences we see.
Okay, that makes sense. But here's another thought.
Okay.
If we have more money as a society,
Yeah.
wouldn't that also increase the demand for those services?
You're absolutely right to bring that up.
Yeah.
It's not just about the Baumol effect.
Right.
Rising incomes themselves also play a role.
Okay, so it's like a double whammy.
It is.
Fair enough.
And economists call this the income effect.
The income effect.
Yeah. And the book does a great job of presenting data that compares and contrasts these different perspectives.
So it's a complex interplay of factors.
It is not just one simple explanation.
I'm starting to see the bigger picture here.
Me too. But I'm curious.
Mm.
You mentioned that the book talks about overcoming the Baumol effect.
Yeah,
What does that even mean?
that's a good question.
If it's baked into how our economy works, is it even possible to overcome it?
Well, that's a great question, and it leads us to some important implications of this economic phenomenon, but I think we're going to have to save that for part 2.
Oh, no. Looks like we've reached the end of part 1 of our deep dive. But don't worry, we'll pick up right where we left off in part 2.
We'll be back.
We'll explore how to navigate this Baumol effect and what it might mean for the future. So stay tuned.
Can't wait.
So before the break, we were getting into this idea of overcoming the Baumol effect.
Right.
Fill us in.
Okay, so.
What does overcoming it even look like?
Well, the book makes a point that maybe overcoming the Baumol effect completely isn't really the right way to think about it. You know, because if it stems from these differences in how quickly sectors can improve their productivity,
Yeah.
it's not something you just eliminate.
Right. It's like part of the system.
Yeah, it's something we kind of have to learn to live with.
So it's more about finding ways to like manage the impact, not necessarily erasing it.
That's a good way to put it.
So the book doesn't really offer like a magic solution.
No, not really.
Because there probably isn't one, right?
Yeah, it's a complex issue.
But understanding this Baumol effect at least gives us a framework for thinking about some strategies.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm all about strategies. What kind of approaches are we talking about?
Well, one strategy is to focus on maximizing those productivity gains in the progressive sector.
Okay.
You know, those areas like manufacturing and technology.
Right, where it's easier to boost efficiency.
Exactly. So if those sectors become even more productive, it could help offset those rising costs in the stagnant sector.
So it's kind of like trying to make the good side of the Baumol effect stronger.
Right.
To counterbalance the bad side.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Okay, I like that. And are there any, like, real-world examples of this happening?
Well, think about online education.
Okay.
Now, it's not a perfect replacement for a traditional classroom,
Sure.
but it has the potential to reach more students with fewer resources.
Yeah.
That's a form of productivity gain right there.
Right, because you're able to do more with less.
Exactly.
Okay, and what about in healthcare?
Well, we're seeing things like telemedicine popping up,
Oh, yeah.
which could also improve efficiency.
Yeah, make things a little bit smoother.
Exactly. These are just early examples, of course.
Sure.
But they show how important it is to be finding new approaches.
Right, always innovating.
Exactly. And the book also talks about how public policy plays a role.
Okay, public policy, how does that fit into all of this?
Well, it's all about avoiding policies that make the problem worse. For example, too much regulation in the stagnant sector could actually stifle innovation
Interesting.
and make it even harder to improve productivity.
So it's like you need to create an environment where both the progressive and the stagnant sectors can thrive
Exactly.
and innovate.
Yeah.
You can't just focus on one or the other.
Right.
Okay. And I think it's important to remember that the Baumol effect isn't just about costs.
That's a good point.
It also impacts how we allocate resources as a society.
Right. Because if we know that services like education and healthcare are likely to keep getting more expensive compared to goods,
Yeah.
we have to make some tough choices about where to invest our limited resources.
It makes you wonder, are we as a society really facing those tough questions head on?
That's a good question.
Are we ready for those choices?
It's a conversation we need to have.
We do.
Because if these trends continue,
Yeah.
and there's no reason to think they won't,
Right.
some big questions emerge. Questions like, how much are we willing to pay for a college education? How do we ensure access to quality healthcare without breaking the bank?
Yeah.
These are questions about our values as much as they are about economics.
It's like this Baumol effect
Mhm.
is holding up a mirror to our priorities as a society.
I like that.
It's forcing us to acknowledge those trade-offs
Yeah.
that we're willing to make as our economy changes and we become, in theory, wealthier.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Now, here's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, lay it on me.
The book also offers some insights into the long-term implications of the Baumol effect.
Okay, the long game.
Yeah. So what does a world shaped by the Baumol effect look like down the road?
Well, for one thing, we can expect the services sector to keep growing as a portion of the overall economy.
So more jobs in teaching,
Yeah.
healthcare, that kind of thing.
Most likely, yes, but that raises another question.
Okay, what's that?
If more of our workforce is in sectors with slower productivity growth,
Yeah.
what happens to overall economic growth?
Does that mean a slowdown?
Potentially, yes.
Hmm.
Some economists argue we're already seeing signs of this with productivity growth in developed economies slowing down in recent decades.
But we also talked about how shifting to a more service-based economy could mean greater satisfaction for people,
Right.
even if it comes at the cost of slower productivity growth.
Exactly. It's complicated.
It is a complex trade-off.
Yeah, and the book encourages us to think critically about what it means to live in a world where services are increasingly dominant.
It feels like we're standing on the edge of like a major economic shift,
It is a shift.
one that's going to challenge our assumptions about
Yeah.
growth,
Yeah.
productivity, and even like the nature of work itself.
It's a shift that's already in motion.
It is, and the Baumol effect is a powerful lens through which to view it.
I agree.
It feels like we've only just scratched the surface here.
Yeah.
What else does the book say about where the Baumol effect is headed?
Well, there's one more crucial point the book makes
Okay.
that I think will give our listeners something to really think about.
All right, but you're going to have to save it
Oh, yeah.
because we're running out of time
Darn.
for this part of the deep dive. But don't worry, we'll be back
We'll be back.
for the third and final part where we'll wrap up our exploration of the Baumol effect. So stay with us.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, so last time we were left hanging
I know, right? A real cliffhanger.
with that crucial point about the future of the Baumol effect. So lay it on us.
All right. Well, remember how we talked about the progressive sector, those industries where productivity just keeps booming?
Yeah, those lucky ducks.
Right. Well, as that sector keeps growing
Okay.
and becomes a smaller slice of the overall economic pie,
I see where you're going with this.
its power to actually drive up prices in the stagnant sector diminishes.
So the Baumol effect like loses its grip.
Yeah, in a sense.
Does it just vanish then?
Not necessarily vanish, but it suggests that the rate at which those prices in education and healthcare rise could eventually slow down.
Okay, so like back in the day
Yeah.
when we saw those huge cost increases.
Right between like 1950 and 1970.
Right.
That's when productivity growth was at its peak.
So the Baumol effect was like in overdrive.
Exactly. It was like they were in a race.
Yeah.
And productivity was winning by a mile.
But as that gap narrows,
Yeah.
the pressure on education and healthcare costs eases up.
That's the idea. It's almost a paradox.
It is kind of.
The very success of those high productivity industries
Yeah.
could lead to a taming of the Baumol effect.
Okay, but let's say it does start to weaken.
Right.
Are we going to suddenly see education and healthcare costs just plummet?
Probably not.
Okay.
Remember, the Baumol effect is just one piece of this puzzle.
Oh, of course.
Other things like rising incomes.
Yeah.
And the fact that people just want these services more.
As they get wealthier.
Right. They'll still push those prices upward.
So no sudden U-turn, more like a gradual easing of the incline.
Exactly. The book doesn't give us a crystal ball
Right.
to predict exactly when or how much the Baumol effect will weaken.
Sure. And we don't want to oversimplify things either.
Definitely not.
So where does all of this leave us?
Well,
If we had to boil down this whole deep dive into the Baumol effect, what's the big takeaway?
I think the most important thing to remember is when you see those rising prices in education and healthcare, don't just assume it's a sign of failure or inefficiency.
Right.
In many cases, it's just a reflection of the bigger picture.
That uneven pace of progress we were talking about.
Exactly.
It's like realizing those rising costs are a symptom, not the disease itself.
That's a good way to put it.
They're telling the story about how our economy is evolving.
And understanding the Baumol effect
Yeah.
gives us the tools to start thinking about how to manage its impact
We can focus on maximizing productivity,
wherever we can,
and we can make smarter choices about where we invest our resources.
based on what we value the most.
So it's not just about dollars and cents.
Right.
It's about making choices that align with our values.
Absolutely. And having a more nuanced understanding of these complex economic forces.
Right, because they shape our lives in so many ways.
They do.
Well, you've certainly given me a new perspective on these issues. It's like I've got these new glasses to see the world through.
I feel the same way. And you know what? The book ends by asking this really thought-provoking question.
Oh, I like those. Hit me with it.
What does it mean for innovation and how we allocate resources if the Baumol effect leads to a future where more of our economy is focused on services?
Wow, that's a big one.
It is, isn't it?
It's like we zoomed out from education and healthcare costs
Yeah.
to this grand view of the whole economic landscape.
Exactly. And it raises all sorts of fascinating questions like, will we see breakthroughs in those areas that allow for sudden leaps in productivity?
Or do we have to rethink how we value work in a service-dominated economy?
Right.
It's like the Baumol effect isn't just describing what is.
Yeah,
It's making us think about what could be.
exactly. And that's the beauty of this kind of deep dive.
Absolutely.
It's not just about learning facts, it's about sparking curiosity and thinking differently about the world around us.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Sounds good.
We've explored a lot of ground today, and I hope everyone listening feels a little more equipped to navigate those tricky waters of rising prices.
I hope so too.
Remember, they're not always a bad thing. They're often just a reflection of the amazing and complex ways our economy works.
Well said.
So until next time, keep diving deep and never stop questioning.
See you next time.